The day my mother told me not to bring my son to a family picnic, 23 adults heard it, and not one of them stepped in. My daughter did. She was 13, wearing a faded volleyball shirt and a crooked ponytail, and when my mother smiled across a folding picnic table and said, "Next time, just don't bring the kid," my daughter pushed her chair back, stood up, and said, "Say that again." The whole table went silent. My name is Kara. I'm 34, I live outside Columbus, Ohio, and I have 2 kids. My daughter Mallory is 13 and has the backbone of a woman 3 times her age. My son, Toby, is 6, missing both front teeth, obsessed with dinosaurs, and gentle in a way that still catches me off guard. I work as a dental hygienist during the week and take reception shifts at an urgent care clinic on weekends. I make enough to keep things running, but not enough to absorb surprises without feeling them. What matters more is this. For years, I was the one quietly holding my family together. When my parents' furnace died in the middle of January, I sent the money. When my father needed new tires, and they were short that month, I covered it. When my mother wanted a birthday dinner she absolutely could not afford and somehow left her purse at home, I paid the bill before anyone could make a scene. I never complained. I told myself that was what family did. You helped. You showed up. And one day, when it was your turn to need something, they would show up for you too. They never did. My mother, Patricia, had a talent for cruelty that wore lipstick and smiled while it happened. She didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She said things softly enough that if you repeated them later, people would act like you were exaggerating. She could compliment your haircut and somehow make you feel small in the same sentence. My father, Glenn, had spent so many years agreeing with her that I honestly think he forgot disagreement was an option. The only person in that family who ever looked at me clearly was my cousin Dana. She used to tell me, "Write it down. One day you'll need to remember why you stopped." She saw what my mother was doing long before I let myself name it. The picnic happened over 4th of July weekend at a metro park outside town. My aunt organized it. There were coolers, paper plates, kids running around, somebody grilling burgers, old Motown playing through a speaker that kept cutting in and out. For the first couple hours, it was actually nice. Toby was happy. He played tag with the other kids, shared his juice box with a little girl he'd never met, and when he skinned his knee on the sidewalk, he came over and said, "Mama, I think I need a dinosaur Band-Aid," like he was filing a formal request. But my mother had been watching him all afternoon with that tight look she got when someone else's joy inconvenienced her. When he brushed past her chair, she sighed. When a cup of lemonade tipped over onto the grass after he bumped the table, she muttered, "This is exactly why." I cleaned it up. I told Toby to be more careful. I let it go. Then dinner started. Toby was sitting beside Mallory, swinging his legs because the bench was too high, ketchup on his chin, being exactly as disruptive as a 6-year-old at a family cookout is supposed to be. And out of nowhere, my mother set down her fork, looked straight at me, and said with that awful polite smile, "Kara, next time just don't bring the kid." It would make things easier for everyone. I can still hear the silence that followed. My aunt studied her plate. My uncle suddenly got very focused on his corn. My father took a drink and looked up at the sky like cloud formations were urgent. And then Toby looked at me and whispered, "Mama, does Grandma not want me here?" That question went through me like glass. I opened my mouth, ready to do what I had always done. Smooth it over. Say something calm. Protect the peace. Protect everyone except the people who deserved it. Before I could speak, Mallory stood. She looked straight at my mother and said, "Say that again." My mother laughed the way people do when they think a child has forgotten her place. "Mallory, sit down. This is an adult conversation." And my daughter said, calm as anything, "Then stop acting like a child." I think one of my uncles actually choked. My mother didn't look at Mallory after that. She looked at me. She always looked at me when she wanted to reassert control. "This is what happens when you don't teach your children respect," she said. And maybe it was Toby's face. Maybe it was hearing my own daughter say what I had been too afraid to say for years. Maybe I was just done. Whatever it was, something in me finally shifted. I looked at my mother and said, Toby is your grandson, and if you can't treat him like family, I don't see why I should keep treating you like mine. Then I packed up my kids, my bowl of potato salad, and what was left of my dignity, and I left. The drive home was quiet. Mallory stared out the window. Toby fell asleep holding a plastic dinosaur in one hand. I drove with both hands tight on the wheel, and my mother's words replaying in my head like a bad song. Next time, don't bring the kid. When I got home and tucked the kids into bed, I called Dana. She answered on the first ring. I told her everything, every word, every look, every person who said nothing. When I finished, she said, "You've been writing checks for people who wouldn't hand you a glass of water if you were on fire. When are you going to stop?" And I said, "Tonight." Stopping wasn't dramatic. I didn't make an announcement. I just stopped. 9 days later, my mother called and mentioned their water heater was making a strange noise. She didn't ask for money directly. She never did. She just sighed and said she didn't know what they were going to do with my father only working part-time and everything so expensive. She left that familiar silence on the line, the one that was supposed to pull me toward my wallet. I said, "That sounds stressful. I hope you figure it out." She went so quiet I thought the call dropped. 2 days after that, she called about the electric bill. Same sigh, same bait, same answer from me. Maybe the utility company can help with a payment plan. It was the first time in years that I let her sit in the discomfort she'd been handing me my whole life. Then came the backlash. My aunt called to say I was selfish. One of my mother's friends, a woman I had spoken to maybe half a dozen times, called to say I should think about what example I was setting for my children. My uncle sent a text that said only, "Family first." Interesting philosophy from people who never seemed to apply it in my direction. Part of me felt guilty. I'm not going to lie about that. When you've been the fixer for so long, stepping back feels wrong even when it's healthy. It feels like failing, even when it's actually the first honest thing you've done in years. Then Toby came home from school one afternoon, climbed onto a kitchen chair while I was making dinner, and asked, "Mama, am I bad?" I turned off the stove and sat beside him. He said, "Because Grandma doesn't like me, so maybe I'm bad." That was the moment everything became simple. Not easy. Simple. I held him and told him he was good and funny and kind and perfect exactly as he was. I told him grown-ups sometimes have broken ways of thinking and that none of this was because of him. He nodded like kids do when they want to trust you completely. Then he went to play with his dinosaurs. I went into the bathroom, shut the door, and cried on the floor. That night, I made my second decision. The first was no more money. The second was no more family events, until my mother apologized to Toby. Not to me, to him. She needed to look that little boy in the eye and tell him he had done nothing wrong. I called her and said exactly that. She said, "You're punishing me over a joke." A joke. My son wondering if he was bad was apparently the punchline. I said, "Then it should be very easy to apologize for it." She hung up on me. After that, she started telling everyone her version of the story. In her version, I was ungrateful and dramatic. I had cut off my struggling parents over one harmless comment at a barbecue. She left out Toby. She left out the years of money. She left out the part where everyone sat there and let it happen. My father called once and asked if I could just let it go. I said, "Dad, you sat there while she said it. You saw Toby's face, and you took a drink instead of opening your mouth." There was a long silence, and then he said quietly, "I know." It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. Meanwhile, Mallory was watching everything. She noticed the tension before I spoke it. One night, she came into my room and said, "What I did at the picnic, I'd do it again." I told her she shouldn't have to fight battles for her little brother. She said, "I'm not fighting for him by myself. I'm fighting with you." I have never been more proud of anyone in my life. Then, 5 weeks after the picnic, she came home acting strange, checking her phone and setting it face down every time I walked by. Later that night, after Toby was asleep, she came into my room and said, "I need to show you something, and I need you not to freak out." My mother had been texting her. The first messages were sweet. "Grandma misses you." Then they shifted. "Your mom has always been emotional. Maybe you could talk to her for me. I wish she'd let me see you and Toby." Slowly, carefully, my mother was trying to recruit my 13-year-old into managing her conflict for her. And she never asked once how Toby was doing. Mallory hadn't ignored the messages. She had answered them. When my mother said I was emotional, Mallory wrote back, "My mom isn't emotional. She's just done pretending everything is fine when it isn't." When my mother tried to get her to convince me, Mallory said, "I'm not going to ask my mom to forgive someone who hasn't apologized. That wouldn't make sense." I read those messages twice, then looked at my daughter and said, "You are unbelievable." She asked if she was in trouble. I said, "The only person in trouble is your grandmother." This is the part some people still say I took too far. I screenshotted every message my mother sent Mallory and forwarded them to every relative who had called me selfish. No commentary. Just the screenshots and one line, "This is what she's doing now." The responses changed after that. My aunt called and, for once, sounded shaken. My uncle said nothing at all. Dana laughed so hard she nearly dropped the phone and then showed up 2 days later with pizza for Mallory and a stuffed triceratops for Toby. 2 weeks after I sent those screenshots, my father showed up at my house with a paper bag of cinnamon rolls from the bakery I loved as a kid. He sat at my kitchen table, put the bag down, and started crying. Real crying. The kind that folds a man inward. He said, "I failed you." Then, for 2 hours, he told me the truth. He had always known my mother leaned on me too hard. He hated every time I handed over money. He had tried once, years earlier, to question it, and my mother froze him out for nearly 2 weeks, so he never challenged her again. He said he had spent 37 years choosing what was easier instead of what was right. Then he asked, "What if I stop doing that?" A few days later, he did. He told my mother the picnic was wrong, the texts were wrong, and the years of depending on me were wrong. He told her that if she didn't fix it, she was going to lose more than money this time. About 9 weeks after the picnic, my phone rang. It was my mother. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "I need to apologize to Toby and to you." I didn't rush to forgive her. I said I'd think about it. In the end, I let her come to my house on my terms. Sunday dinner. Just me, the kids, and her. I told her not to come unless she was prepared to give a real apology. She showed up wearing a dress she never would have worn to anything casual and carrying yellow tulips, my favorite flowers. Toby was on the couch watching cartoons. He looked up at her and didn't move. She walked over slowly, knelt in front of him, and said, "What I said at the picnic was mean and wrong. You did nothing wrong. You are my grandson, and I love you, and I'm sorry." Toby looked at her for a few seconds and said, "It's okay. Do you want to see my new dinosaur?" That's who he is, open-hearted in ways adults no longer know how to be. My mother cried then, not the dramatic kind, real tears. At dinner, she apologized to me too. She said she had been unfair for years. She admitted she had crossed a line with Mallory. She even said she was willing to see a counselor, which nearly made me drop my fork. And when she apologized to my daughter, Mallory said, "Thank you, but I'd do it again if I had to." My mother gave a small, surprised laugh and said, "I believe you. Things are better now, but they aren't magically fixed. I still don't give my parents money. That part is over for good." My father found steady work at a hardware store and seems lighter than he has in years. My aunt eventually admitted she should have stayed out of it. My uncle still doesn't say much, but at Thanksgiving he sat beside Toby and asked him to name every dinosaur on his shirt. For him, that was growth. Dana still texts me every morning sometimes. A while back she sent, "Day 147 of choosing yourself. Look at you." I cried when I read it. So that's what happened. A picnic table, a cruel sentence, a little boy wondering if he was bad, a 13-year-old who refused to let that stand, screenshots, silence, cinnamon rolls, and, eventually, an apology that should have come much sooner. But the thing I carry most from all of it isn't what my mother said. It's what my daughter did. because when the whole table stayed quiet, a girl in a volleyball shirt stood up, looked my mother in the eye, and said, "Say that again."